Hey, Read Through the Word. Today is January 17th, and today's lesson is called Connect the Dots. It's not my best title ever for a lesson, but it's where we are. We are in Genesis chapter 47, verses 23 through 27. It says this: Then Joseph said to the people, "Look, today I have bought you and your land for Pharaoh. I will provide you with seed so you can plant the fields. Then when you harvest it, 1/5 of your crop will belong to Pharaoh. You may keep the remaining 4/5 as seed for your fields and as food for you, your household, and your little ones." "You have saved our lives," they exclaimed. "May it please you, my lord, to let us be Pharaoh's servants." Joseph then issued a decree, still in effect in the land of Egypt, that Pharaoh should receive 1/5 of all the crops grown on his land. Only the land belonging to the priests was not given to Pharaoh. Meanwhile, the people of Israel settled in the region of Goshen in Egypt, where they acquired property, and they were fruitful, and their population grew rapidly. Okay, I covered I think last year on this date in 2023, the whole idea of what it meant for Jacob's family to settle in Goshen and what that means. So, if you're new with Read Through the Word this year and were not with us in 2023, you can still access those teachings. You just need to go in and put 2023 in your cart. $0. You can always make a donation if you feel led, and that gives you access to last year. So sometimes if I reference something and you want to know more about it, you can go back and look at that. So that was what I taught on this day last year. But today I'm calling it Connect the Dots. So I want to talk. As always, there are so many ways we could go with this lesson. There are so many different things we could talk about today. But I want to look at the story of Joseph, and connect the dots and to see what this is about. So let's talk for a minute. So in the book of Genesis, there are 50 chapters. And out of all the chapters, I'm looking back. I believe I started to say this is Genesis 37, but I want to double check. Yes, Genesis 37 is where we're introduced to Joseph. So if you look at the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then you have Joseph. The story of Joseph is given more time in Genesis than any other character. And it's very interesting. It's the Joseph story connects the story of the patriarchs with the rest of Scripture because the rest of Scripture gives more time to the patriarchs than it does to Joseph, even though the story of Joseph is given more time in Genesis than Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob. And so it's very interesting when we look at it. But as always, we're looking at Scripture, and if we're going to connect the dots and see meta-narrative wise, what does this tell us about God? What's God doing? I want to go so hard and heavy after all of this, but that's not what we're doing. If you've not caught on to this yet, I seem to want to teach absolutely everything in these 12 to 15 minutes that I have. And I can't do that. And I That's why I want y'all to comment. I want to hear from you. I want to see what you're learning. I want to know, because every bit of me, I'm looking at my Word Up Ministries coffee cup right over my ring light. I want to grab my coffee cup and sit and talk and discuss these things and to learn more about God. And the way we do that is through our comments. I know it's not a back and forth. Every once in a while, I try to hop on live on our Facebook group. So, and we'll get some more of that. But what's God doing? So, if we're going to look at it, I think so many times we can look at Scripture me-centered. Don't look at Scripture with a center about, what's this teach me about me? What does this mean to me? I always tell my students, the minute someone says that Scripture means something for you different than it does for me, run fast. It's not the proper way to read Scripture. What does it say? And what is it telling us about God? Remember, the story of the Bible is who God is and how he works with his people. So, through the Joseph account, what do we learn about God? What we see is Genesis records, and it happens really fast. It records the creation, the fall. That's Genesis 1, 2, and 3. And then it records the redemptive storyline. It starts from Genesis 3:15, it's on. Redemption is promised and redemption is accomplished in the New Testament with the Gospels in Jesus Christ. And then later we're looking forward to restoration. So we're living this. And the promise of redemption is told through covenant. Genesis tells us those. So right now, we are in Abraham's covenant as that builds, looking toward the next covenant. The next covenant we will see will be through David. But as we're looking through this, that the promise of redemption, God's promise, he makes promise through covenant and then keeps that through Scripture. We watch as he does that. So Genesis also records a series of threats that endanger the covenant line. So what you see is there's been a covenant made. There was a covenant made at the very beginning with Adam and Eve, and then the next one with Abraham. Well, and then there was Noah too. Excuse me. While I'm yawning. So that covenant, that it seems like that the covenant's in danger. We see glimpses of that early on through stories of, if sin has entered into the world and this whole Cain and Abel thing, Cain kills Abel, Cain goes off, what are we going to do now? And then Seth enters, and the promises are all kept through Seth. So that is the line that we follow. And then after the flood, we follow the line of Shem. It's just like if you ever do genealogy of your own, you don't chase everybody in the family. You go through your granddaddy, the great-granddaddy, the great-great-great. I've done genealogy before, and I get in there and I'm chasing everybody I could ever been related to. But the Bible doesn't do that. The Bible tells us the story of the covenant, and it tells us the people of the promise. But through the telling of this, we see that it's like a nail biter. We're sitting like, oh, what's going to happen? They're going to die. How's God going to do this? Because they die off, we're done. The story's over. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And you're going to hear that multiple times through the Old Testament. But the endanger comes to the covenant line either by either a danger to its survival or its purity. So what you see is we start off with the story of Joseph in Genesis 37, that family division and violence threaten the seed's survival. I always say Jacob has his sons And you think your family's dysfunctional. This is a family. Every family is dysfunctional. We are sinners in relationship with each other. There is dysfunction with a capital D with this family. They're going to kill each other if we don't watch them. What in the world is going to happen? You also see unrighteousness and intermarriage with other nations that threaten the seed's purity. So you see that in Genesis chapter 38. And then you see a global famine that endangers the covenant line in Genesis 42. So you see these dangers that look like the family is going to die off, or the bloodline is going to be, it's not the covenant people of God. They're not going to keep that. So what we see that each one of these tensions in our story between God and what he has promised, and then the actions that look like, that all of this is going to fall apart. Then what we see is that God uses Joseph to resolve each of these recurring problems in Abraham's family. So Genesis is going to when we get in Genesis 50, it's going to be ready to sit and wait for the opening of Exodus, as everything's ready for the next step in God's redemptive plan. But what we see that is, instead of revenge for all of this that's occurring with brother trying to kill each other, and they're dysfunctional. They're not acting as brothers. But what we see is Joseph reconciles with his brothers and restores the family by extending forgiveness. So he's not acting in hate like we had seen. So we see that Joseph is going to turn this. But then what we see is Joseph settles his family in Goshen, shielding them from cultural influence and intermarriage. And that's what I talked about last year. That God even uses the hatred of the Egyptians towards the Israelites, in that they don't want anything to do with them. And they're like, fine, you know what? We're all going to go hang out in this land together. And now we're a band of brothers. We don't hate each other anymore. Forgiveness has been extended. And now we're going to bond together as a family. Away from all the other cultural influences, we're going to go live in the land of Goshen. And we're going to live like the people of God there. And then what you see is that Joseph also preserves his family from famine. So God uses wisdom. He gives wisdom to Joseph to tell him how to, everybody is dying of famine at this point. And that movement that God uses Joseph for this. Because what we see is all of these curses that are a consequence of sin, the fall, that Joseph is unraveling the curse. The story of Joseph isn't about how Joseph fulfills the promises to Abraham. That's not what it's about. But it's about how God keeps his covenant promises through a flawed family. Look at the story of the brothers. There's wow. I mean, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah. I mean, that's the top four, and they all mess up big time. But God's not done with them. That God will use a flawed family and will keep his promises. God can do impossible through flawed humans. So what you see in the book is that Moses shows his people through the story of Joseph that they can look to a coming Joseph who would completely reverse the curse and fulfill the promise. So with Joseph, we get just a glimpse of God has made promises through covenant of the redemption of his people. And what Moses gives us in the book of Genesis is just a glimpse of how a holy God works through flawed people to show us just a little bit of the unraveling of the curse. But there will be a future Joseph, because Joseph is a type. There's a future one who will totally get rid of the curse. And so the rest of the Old Testament is leading us to that point. So I hope you will continue reading the story of Joseph as we finish out the book of Genesis with these things in mind. So we'll see you next time on Read Through the Word.